Okay, welcome to yet another lesson on this Airbus FMS. I hope you followed my earlier two lessons where I introduced the concept of Airbus FMS to you all. Now, when I was planning my third lesson, I found that it is impossible to go on to the third lesson just explaining the FMS procedures alone, because I found that the system is so well integrated, and then there are different displays in which some information has to be extracted. So it is impossible for us to proceed just on FMS alone. So I felt that there is a requirement to uh, uh, explain the flight FCU selections and little bit of display possibilities that are presented to the pilot to explain the FMS usage further. Therefore, in this lesson we will be covering the FCU flight control unit, the panel, and little bit of display for the pilot. That's what this lesson is going to be all about. Okay, let me take you straight to the cockpit. Here I have highlighted a component called FCU, the flight control unit. Traditionally, this component would be called the autopilot in earlier cockpits, and it would have been located in any other place, maybe in the center pedestal in some of the cockpits which I have flown. But now almost all cockpits will place the autopilot control unit, and in Airbus 320 it's called the flight control unit, on top of the center instrument panel, which is easily accessible by the captain and the first officer. Here I've highlighted the FCU panel, and I made a nice graphic, and I hope you are able to follow it. You are able to see the graphic very clearly. This FCU can be divided, so-called, or portioned into three units. There is a center portion which is common, where all the selections are made to control the parameters of the aircraft flight parameters. That is to make any change, to configure, to direct the plane's path by either the captain or the co-pilot. Therefore, this is a common portion for both the captain and co-pilot. Stands to reason. You can't have two different directing selections that are possible. However, I want to draw your attention to the left side and the right side possibility, one for the captain side and the one for the first officer side. So these two are very similar in nature, and they are able to provide the possibility of configuring different windows, configuring into different displays of different windows for the respective stations. That is, the captain can configure his side separately, the co-pilot can configure his side separately. So these two sub panels are absolutely identical because they represent two separate entities of display that are possible. To explain more, I have shown the cockpit display as such. It's possible, that is possible. Here, as you can see, there is the left side, the captain side, and the co-pilot side, and the FCU I have already highlighted, and the display portion, that is the common portion of the captain side and the co-pilot side, have been highlighted. Now, as you can see, there are two scopes, two display possibilities for the captain side and two for the first officer side. These two displays, that is the left one is the primary flight display unit and the nav display unit has been which has been highlighted here. Now the display can be controlled to his requirement depending on the phase of the flight by each separately, that the captain can display his nav display separately and the co-pilot can make his nav display separately. Similarly, there is a very small possibility for the primary flight display also that is possible, that is the QNH selections, etc., which we will learn as we go. Okay, let me explain further. As I explained, there is a center portion of the FCU and there are, which is common to both the captain and the co-pilot, and there is a display selection which are possible by the captain and the co-pilot, and there are two display units, that is the primary flight display and the nav display, two each on the left side and the right side for the captain and the co-pilot. And we already learned there are two FMGS, flight management guidance system, that is the computer, which are possible. The entire system is integrated and there are different possibilities, and the data which are entered in the flight management computer is interchangeable, and the latest fed data is all the time upgraded and presented to both the pilots. So the point which I want to highlight is the entire system is integrated so that there is absolutely no confusion in the cockpit. Let's get on to the actual philosophy. Here I will take some time to explain the FCU philosophy. There are two modes of operations which are possible. Now all these selection buttons inside on the FCU, the flight control unit, they are all, first of all, there is a rotary motion which is possible, which is to select the a particular figure in a window, and the other one which is possible is the button can be either pushed or pulled, which is called the managed mode and the selected mode. Now there is a managed mode. In this mode, the lateral and the vertical path are guided by the FMGS. The speed profiles are computed by the flight management function as per data fed in the MCDU. Now, before the flight, the pilot would have prepared the entire route and the different profiles, the speeds required, etc., as required by the route. He would have already fed it for his computations and calculations, and depending on the historic wind data or the current wind data available, he would have already had a detailed flight plan which is possible for that flight. So this parameter is fed in the FMGC or flight management and guidance computer, which will control the long range long-term flight path possibility of the aircraft. However, there is a selected mode which is possible because, as you all know, during the flight there are several times there are tactical, there are immediate changes that are required to be achieved by the captain due to ATC restrictions or due to any other requirements, due to weather maybe. There is maybe a small track deviation which is required, or the ATC, air traffic control, has asked the pilot to change his track heading to comply with air traffic regulations. Therefore, there is a selected mode which is possible. He will take over the selected mode and make the necessary changes, and then once the requirement is fulfilled, then he will come back to the managed mode. So these are the two possibilities. One is the managed mode and the selected mode. Having seen the manage mode and the selected mode, and also I told you that the knobs have two possibilities, either to push or to pull. Now, when any flight parameter function knob is pushed, then the guidance is done by the FMGS, and the display on the FCU panel is just dashes and dot, indicating to the pilot that he is not under control and the FMGC is controlling the flight path of the airplane. In the selected mode, that means from the manage mode, when the pilot were to take over the control of the flight parameter, then it is called the selected mode. And when the function knobs are in pulled condition, then the guidance is achieved by the pilot input parameters and the figure is reflected on the FCU. Now, if he wants a different figure, then he will rotate the knob and then pull it again. So if there is a small increase in speed is required for a brief period, then he will rotate it to the speed knob to the right and select a higher speed and then pull, which will provide the control manually to the pilot to increase the speed. Okay, let me explain the primary flight display in a little bit more detail, and I'm sure you are aware of it, but for the sake of the lesson completeness, I will explain to you. As you all know, this primary flight display unit is a combination of 6 the primary flight instruments that you are familiar in a traditional training stage cockpit or a traditional cockpit. For the sake of explanation, I will go over them one by one. Firstly, and I want you to notice as to where such this display is presented in this primary flight display. Okay, let's go on. Firstly, the airspeed indicator, the altimeter indications, the vertical speed indicator, the artificial horizon, the direction indicator or the compass indicator, and the turn and slip indicator. Thus, all these 6 instruments have been combined into one and the presented in a single display. Of course, the QNX selection is also possible as has been shown in the picture. Now, I will bring your attention to the topmost portion of the display, the primary flight display that is possible. Now, this topmost portion, the display, there are some lines and displays which are possible. This is called the flight mode annunciator. If you ask me, this is one of the most important displays for indicating to the pilot as to where or what mode, what is the current parameter of the flight parameter that is being flown by the that is controlling the plane. Now, this flight mode annunciator is the most important, as I told you, and we will keep talking about it throughout our lessons. The information is displayed in 2 and sometimes 3 lines, and some of them are combined, which we shall see in as and when the requirement comes in that particular lesson. But what I want you all to understand at this stage is, irrespective of any other selection which has been made on the FCU or FMGC, the aircraft would do, or aircraft is controlled by the present display that is being displayed in the flight mode annunciator. Why I'm trying to explain this in greater detail is that it is possible that the pilot made a change on the FCU panel or the FMGC, but he has not effected the same uh, uh, by making a small error or by lack of oversight. So he thinks that he has effected the change, but it has not taken place. Especially sometimes where quick changes are to be made, or a steep descent or a steep climb are to be made, and if the flight went into a reversion mode, so that would not have affected. So there, finally the aircraft is following the path which is displayed in the flight mode annunciator, and the pilot has to take cue only from the flight mode annunciator, and that's why this is important. So we are going to keep learning about this FMA annunciator throughout, and so to that extent it is going to be important. Here I have highlighted the nav display selections that are possible by either the captain or the co-pilot. I have shown it in little bit, blown it up and shown it. We will go through them. The top window, of course, shows the displays that are possible, that the constraints, the waypoint, VOR, DME, NDB, airport, etc. So if the pilot were to select VOR, on his nav display, all the VORs that are existing in the database within the range that has been selected by the pilot would be displayed. Similarly, if you selected the airports, then all the airports within the range that has been selected by the captain would be displayed. Now let's get down further. Now there is a rose mode and the arc mode, and it's a rotary selection. We can see that in the rose mode there is an LS, the VOR and the nav that are possible, and there is an arc mode which is possible, and there is a plan mode in which the whole display is centered around the northern direction. Similarly, there is another knob which gives the different range selections for the pilot for the display, and there is a three-way selection knob right below, that is the ND pointer selector, that is ADF VOR, and center portion of course is off. So the pilot is able to, there are two pointers on the ND nav display unit, and he is able to select either the ADF or the VOR in his particular display. Similar displays are also possible by the first officer. Here I have highlighted the center portion, that is the flight parameter control portion of the FCU, and I want you all to have spend some time and have a look at it before we get on to the detailed explanation of each of the selection. Okay, let's go over the speed control possibilities from the FCU. There are firstly the speed Mac push button. The speed Mac, as the name suggests, alternates between speed and Mach number selection by the pilot. The next knob is a rotary and a push-pull knob. That is the speed mode. When pushed, it is controlled by the FMGS parameter, which has already been fed from the database, and the display is a dot and dash, so which indicates to the pilot that he has got no further control. When pulled out, then the dot will vanish and a figure will come in the display, and he is able to rotate and select his the speed which is desired by him. Now the next knob is the lateral mode, similar to that of the speed. When pulled out, is selected by the pilot, he is able to take a heading as per his requirement. But when pushed, it will be in the managed mode when it is closer, and in the managed mode there is it is controlled by the FMGC, flight management guidance computer. Obviously there is a track, there is a front waypoint, there is a two waypoint, there is a track, and when it is locked on, the aircraft will the autopilot will try and keep the aircraft on that particular track, and that's what is the managed mode of the lateral mode. Okay, let me introduce you to the different selections that are possible further. On the right, we saw the speed and the lateral mode selections. Now let's go further to the right, and there is another push selector on the FCU panel which alternates between the heading VS, heading vertical speed mode, and the track flight path angle mode. We will be learning about these in greater detail, but at this point I want you to understand this is a push button which alternates between two selections. Let's go further right. There is an altitude selector which is possible. It's a flick knob to the left and right, which gives the possibility of the pilot to select hundreds or thousandth. Normally below transition altitude, or as we come closer to the ground, the pilot would select hundreds, and when flying on the route he would select in thousandth. Further right, there is another push selector button which alternates between the altimeter selection and the indicators in meters and feet. Let's recall that there are still several areas or several countries which follow the metric system in their airspaces, and there is a requirement for the pilot to fly altitudes in meters. Therefore, this possibility is there so that the pilot can switch over if needed. Further right, it's again a pull knob. When pushed, the aircraft will level out immediately. Push to level out is usually known as this knob is known as level out immediately wherever it is. Whenever it is climbing or descending, it will try and level out immediately. This is for an instant requirement of the pilot. When pulled, it displays either the vertical speed in feet per minute or as required by the pilot, or the flight path angle in degrees as required. That means when the center push button is in the track FPA mode, this knob or this selection will give the flight path angle in degrees, and when it is in heading VS mode, then this gives the display in vertical speed mode. That we are on the FCU panel, I will explain to you the other push buttons. There are 6 of them, as you can see. I will go from the left to the right. First is the LOC, lock. I want here to explain here that when this button is pushed, there is a green line that is highlighted, as here it has been highlighted in the option of AP1 and auto thrust. Firstly, the localizer. When the pilot wants to fly the localizer only, then he can press this and it will be highlighted and the aircraft will be directed on only the localizer. Similarly, moving further to the right, there are two selections on the top which are possible, AP1 and AP2. There are two autopilots. And in this case, the autopilot 1 has been selected or engaged, which has been shown by highlighting the green light. And right below is the autopilot engagement, auto thrust engagement status. In this, as highlighted by the green light, the auto thrust has been engaged. Move further right, there is an expedite button. There is an expedite button. When the air traffic control advises the pilot to expedite his climb rate, then this button is pressed and the thrust is increased, boosted up a little bit, and the autopilot automatically increases the rate of climb. And further right is another push button, the approach. This is used to fly the ILS in total, that is including the localizer and the glide slope. So these are the other push selections which are possible to be selected by the captain or the first officer. Okay, this brings us to the end of the lesson, and I hope you found this lesson interesting. And I'm sure as we go on further, the information is going to be very useful. As usual, I will request you all to give your comments on the email ID given below. And please follow my website for further lessons which we are going to develop. And I thank you all for having gone through the lesson patiently once again.